In a forgotten valley carved between black forests and jagged hills stood the ancient kingdom of Eldhollow, a realm draped in fog and ruled by Queen Isolde, a woman of beauty so cold it was said her gaze could crack mirrors. She had inherited the throne from her father, King Edric, whose own end came at the tusks of a great beast during a royal hunt. Isolde never cried that day. She watched the mangled body return to the castle wrapped in linen and declared the mourning period unnecessary. Let death not interrupt the crown, she had said, and from that moment on, her rule became defined by silence, fear, and strange whispers. The people spoke of things they dared not say aloud, tales passed down from their grandmothers of a curse buried in the bloodline, of a pact made with the earth's filth to grant power in exchange for flesh. The first signs came early in her reign, subtle and easy to dismiss. Pigs behaving erratically, farms plagued by unnaturally large litters, boars with amber eyes that refused to flee at the sight of men. Then came the disappearances. Children gone from their beds without a sound, mothers finding nothing but muddy hoofprints trailing into the woods. The clergy tried to cast blame on wolves or bandits, but the woodsmen knew better. Swine walk where men used to tread, they whispered at night, staring at the tree lines that grew darker each year. Isolde, ever indifferent to folk belief, dismissed the reports as nonsense. She had the old women flogged for spreading fear and ordered the burning of pagan relics. But her cruelty did not calm the earth. Instead, the pigs came closer. They gathered near the castle walls at twilight, not in packs but as if summoned, each one silent, watching with eyes that seemed too human. The guards refused to go near them, and soon, not even the dogs would bark at their presence. The queen began to lose sleep, pacing her chambers and staring into the woods. She ordered the slaughter of every pig within 10 leagues, yet still they came, rising from the soil like weeds. One morning, the queen awoke to find hoofprints on the marble of her private garden, and a trail of blood that led to the statue of her mother, Queen Morgana, who herself had vanished without explanation decades ago. The stone eyes of Morgana now seemed to watch her with amusement, as if aware of something Isolde did not yet know. That evening, the seer of Fenmore was summoned. Ira was ancient, blind, her skin like bark and voice like wind through dry leaves. She arrived barefoot, stepping over the palace threshold without a bow, and stood before the queen with silence as her shield. Ira spoke of an old binding, a hunger born from royal betrayal, a curse of gluttony gifted to the soil by Queen Morgana in return for eternal rule. Morgana, she said, had made a pact with the beast of the pit, a creature born of mud and filth, fed by flesh, who demanded only one promise, that every queen of Eldhollow must one day feed it. Isolde laughed then, the sound sharp and hollow. Feed a beast, she mocked. I am the sovereign. I feed nothing. But deep inside, something stirred. A memory, perhaps, of her mother's lullabies ending in pig-like snorts, or her own dreams of dark hooves circling her cradle. That night, the castle moaned under strange winds, and Ira left without another word, dropping a black bristle in the queen's lap before disappearing into the shadows. That bristle was no thicker than a thread, yet it pulsed with heat, and Isolde's fingers blistered when she held it. She cast it into the fire, but it would not burn. In the days that followed, the queen grew more paranoid. She covered mirrors, fearing what might stare back. She stopped eating meat. Her counselors began to vanish. Lord Reeve was found in the stables, gutted, his bones polished clean. Lady Varn was never found at all, though her voice was heard screaming from beneath the floorboards for 3 nights. The queen, in desperation, consulted her late father's hunting journals, searching for anything about the beast that had killed him. There she found a sketch, a massive boar with jagged tusks and a crown of thorns carved into its brow. Written below it in trembling ink was a single phrase: it watches the line. It feeds on queens. Realizing the danger was real and ancient, she ordered a secret ritual chamber to be reopened beneath the keep. Built in the days of Morgana, the chamber was made of black stone, with channels in the floor for blood and a central altar carved with runes older than the language of men. There, Isolde began the preparations for an unholy reversal, a ritual to break the pact. But such magic demanded a price, and only one sacrifice could satisfy the hunger of the earth: the queen herself. She refused. She would not die for a curse. Instead, she captured children from the village, fed their blood into the altar's veins, and demanded the curse be turned upon the pigs. For 3 days, the earth trembled, and the pigs screamed, a sound that shook the teeth of every man and beast in Eldhollow. On the 4th night, the castle gates burst open not by human hands, but by hooves. They came not crawling or galloping, but walking upright, rows of them, eyes glowing like embers. They bore no flesh but shadow, no mouths but void. The guards ran. The queen stood her ground, crown firm upon her brow. And then the earth split open. The castle groaned like a living creature, its stones cracking under the weight of footsteps that were not meant to walk upright. The wind that rushed through the shattered gates carried the stink of rotting hay, churned mud, and something far fouler, the stench of hunger unchained. Queen Isolde stood alone at the top of the grand staircase, her golden gown trailing behind her like a thread through a nightmare. Below her, in the great hall, stood the creatures, pigs, but not pigs. They had the faces of swine but the posture of priests, the bulk of beasts but the eyes of men. And in their gaze was a strange recognition, as if they'd come not to kill her, but to reclaim her. Behind her, the few remaining knights stood trembling, armor clinking like brittle glass. One broke rank and ran, his scream echoing down the stone halls. The pigs did not chase. They simply advanced. Slowly, ceremoniously, as if entering a cathedral rather than storming a fortress. Their leader, a massive boar with silver bristles and tusks like scythes, stepped forward and lifted its snout toward Isolde. It did not grunt. It did not snarl. Instead, it bowed. Isolde felt her knees tremble for the first time in her life. Then the whispers began. Low at first, like the murmurs of wind through wheat. But as the pigs gathered in rows beneath the throne, the sounds grew louder. They did not come from mouths. They slithered into ears, coiled into skulls, rooted in marrow. You were promised, the voice said. Not aloud, but inside her, older than thought, crueler than language. You were born for the pit. Isolde clenched her fists until blood ran between her fingers. She had sacrificed too much to cower now. I am the queen of Eldhollow, she said, her voice cracking like thunder. You are nothing but filth. I command you to leave. A moment of silence passed. Then, as if in response, one of the pigs lifted its head and began to laugh. The sound was wrong. Not squealing, but guttural, human, echoing through stone like mocking bells. Others joined in, until the chamber pulsed with their hideous mirth. One stepped forward, opened its maw wider than should be possible, and vomited a crown at her feet. It was her mother's. Queen Morgana had vanished decades ago, declared dead when she did not return from her journey into the Whispering Woods. No body had ever been found. And now, here was her iron circlet, bent and bloodied, caked in old muck. Isolde stepped back. Then the pigs surged. The knights fell screaming, their blades ineffective. Flesh tore. Blood sprayed. Isolde turned and ran, not out of fear, but fury. If this was to be her fate, she would meet it not with submission, but with fire. She fled into the old wing, where forbidden things had been sealed centuries ago, wings of the castle no longer charted on maps. Behind iron doors she found what she was looking for: the furnace of trials. Once used to burn heretics and witches, the furnace had been sealed by her grandfather after it was said to consume the souls of those it incinerated. The queen tore the seal from the door and stepped inside the chamber of iron and ash. Dust fell like snow. Chains hung from the rafters. She stood at the altar and unsheathed a blade carved from obsidian, the blade of severance, made to cut not flesh but spirit. With a whisper, she slit her palm and let the blood fall onto the altar. I reject the pact, she said. I sever the line. No queen after me shall be devoured. The stone shook. Somewhere below, a scream rose that did not sound animal or human, but like both being pulled apart. The pigs halted in the halls. The silver boar howled. The queen smiled. Then the altar cracked. From the fissure rose a fog, black as tar, choking as fire. It poured into her mouth, her eyes, her wounds. Her crown melted into her skull. Her voice disappeared into silence. When she opened her eyes again, she was no longer Isolde. She was part of it. She stood taller now. The skin on her arms had thickened into hide. Her fingernails had become tusks. Her legs bent backwards. And from her belly came a low, rumbling growl. She had tried to break the curse. Instead, she had become its avatar. She walked back through the blood-streaked halls, and the pigs parted for her, bowing as if a prophet had arrived. The boar with silver bristles knelt. She placed her cracked hand upon its snout. Feast, she whispered. And they did. What followed would never be recorded in scroll or song. The castle of Eldhollow was emptied that night. Not by fire or siege, but by gluttony. By sunrise, not a single soul remained. The stone corridors were clean, scrubbed of blood and bone. Only hoofprints remained. Villagers who approached the castle days later found it hollow. Not destroyed. Not burnt. Simply hollowed out, like fruit eaten from within. They whispered of shadows that grunted at night, of laughing echoes and the smell of wet fur. None dared enter. Some say the queen still walks the throne room in silence, her crown fused to her flesh, her attendants snorting behind her. Others claim the pigs took her down into the roots of the world, where the pact was first made, and that her soul lies screaming still. But one truth remains. The pigs returned to the woods. They multiplied, and now they watch. Long after the screams faded and Eldhollow fell silent, the forest grew fat with silence. The castle, once a beacon of stone and gold, stood like a rotting tooth among trees that seemed to have crept closer overnight. Ivy strangled the turrets. Brambles tore at broken windows. But deep beneath its blackened halls, life stirred. Not human life, not animal, but something else. Something ancient that bloomed only in rot and ruin. Isolde sat on a throne no longer built of marble, but of bone. Her form had changed fully, no longer the proud woman she had been, but a grotesque fusion of queen and beast. Her eyes had split into slits. Her hands bore thick hooves. Her crown had become her skull. Yet her mind remained intact, cruel and calculating, ruling her monstrous court with a presence that made even the dead soil shudder. Around her gathered the swine, no longer ordinary creatures, but followers, apostles of the pit. They did not grunt or squeal now. They spoke in dreams, in whispers, in thoughts that bled into the minds of the weak. Down there in the deep, beneath the throne, lay the pit. Not just a hole in the earth, but a breathing chasm, alive with roots that pulsed like arteries, soil that wept blood, and a mouth carved from time itself. The pit had fed for centuries, on fear, on flesh, on royalty. It had no face, no body, only hunger. And it had made Isolde its voice. She began to receive visions in her sleep. Not dreams, but memories that weren't hers. Echoes of Morgana, her mother, kneeling before the same altar, carving pigs from wood and whispering their names into flame. She saw ancient queens, one after another, each descending into the dark and surrendering a part of themselves. A finger, an eye, a child. All to appease the pit. All to delay the price. But Isolde had not delayed. She had consumed. She had offered blood not to hold off the curse, but to claim it. And now, the pit grew bold. Across the land, pigs multiplied. They appeared where they should not. On mountaintops, in desert caves, even in the streets of distant cities. Herds moved silently through forests at dusk, led by a massive sow with human teeth. Fields rotted overnight. Wells turned to brine. Farmers vanished. The church declared it a pestilence. Armies were sent. They did not return. Isolde's influence spread like a fever. The pigs became vessels, carrying her will from one end of the kingdom to the other. But she wanted more. She wanted remembrance, history. And so she commanded her apostles to write. Monks were taken in their sleep and awoke in the underworld beneath the castle, forced to etch her story in blood across the bones of the dead. Scrolls made of skin, inked in horror, chronicled her rise. She who rose on trotters. She who ruled from rot. These texts were scattered through ruins and tombs, meant not to be read, but felt. Buried knowledge that corrupted minds on sight. One day, the pit whispered something new. It told her the curse was older than she believed. That it did not begin with Morgana. That the first queen had made a deal not to save her people, but to destroy them. A queen named Elira, who ruled a kingdom lost to time, had struck a pact when famine swept her lands. She had knelt at a black tree whose roots ran down to the mouth of the pit. She had begged for food, for survival. In return, the pit had given her swine, hundreds of them, fat and fertile, beasts that never died. Her people rejoiced, but the meat had a price. Those who ate it began to change. They grew tusks. Their skin thickened. They snorted in their sleep. By the time Elira understood, her court was gone. Her people were not fed. They were transformed. She alone remained, and the pit had crowned her its first bride. Isolde now saw herself not as a victim, but an heir, a queen of decay, the third in a line of eternal gluttons. But her rule was not uncontested. Deep in the south, a prince rose, Cassian of Lorne, a bastard born of a concubine, who claimed to bear the blood of Queen Elira's brother. He traveled with fire and iron, slaughtering every pig he found, burning their carcasses until the land turned to ash. He wielded a blade called Hallowfang, forged from a comet that fell during a blood moon. Its edge sang when it touched cursed flesh. Isolde watched him in her dreams, the pit showing her visions of his coming war. She saw him strike down her apostles. She felt his sword slice through her beasts. He was not afraid. He had been marked at birth with a crescent scar across his heart, a sign the pit could not reach him. She began to unravel. For centuries, the curse had gone unchallenged. Now this child of flame dared raise a hand to the Hollow Queen. And so she prepared for war. The castle shook as her children dug tunnels beneath the earth, highways of meat and claw, winding toward Lorne. She poured her thoughts into the soil, sent nightmares to haunt Cassian's soldiers, turned the wind to whispers, the trees to spies. Forests moved behind him. Rivers dried in his path. But he did not yield. At last, the day came when he reached Eldhollow. What he found was not a kingdom, but a tomb. And beneath it, something waiting. Prince Cassian stood at the mouth of Eldhollow with fire in his eyes and the sound of silence all around. His army had fallen behind, slain or broken by the cursed land's horrors. The once great kingdom before him now appeared as a corpse frozen in mid-decay. Towers bent like bone fingers, windows gaped like mouths, and the once white stone of the castle walls was now stained deep with filth and soot. Nothing moved. No flags fluttered. No birds dared fly overhead. Yet beneath the dead silence, he felt it, a tremble in the soil, like the belly of a sleeping beast. He walked alone through the gate. Behind him, only ash and memory followed. Inside the walls, The halls of Eldhollow stretched like tunnels into the belly of the earth. The air was thick with the smell of rotten copper. Bones lined the corridors like tapestries. Tallow candles flickered, though no hands had lit them. Cassian's hand never left the hilt of Hallowfang, the blade forged of fallen star iron, burning faintly with golden light in the gloom. His eyes did not flinch as he passed piles of devoured armor, of chewed human limbs, of ancient runes bleeding from the walls. This was not the castle of men. This was a mausoleum for queens. And deep within it, the queen waited. Isolde, once of golden skin and braided pride, now stood as the swine mother, a monstrous figure fused with her throne of ribs and skulls. Her eyes no longer blinked. Her mouth had widened into a permanent smile carved with tusks. Her flesh pulsed in rhythm with the pit, the gaping hole at her feet that oozed black mist and trembled like a living lung. Around her circled her final brood, swine no longer in form, but in nature. Pig-shaped things with too many legs, eyeless priest creatures that whispered lullabies in reverse. When Cassian stepped into the throne chamber, the floor squelched beneath his boots. The queen lifted her heavy head, and for the first time in years, she spoke aloud. Not in whispers, not in thought, but in a voice like chains dragged over stone. So, she said, the child of light has come. Cassian raised his blade. I've come to silence the hunger. Her laughter echoed like thunder through a grave. The walls cracked. The pit growled. You cannot kill what is owed, she said. The earth remembers. Every crown devours. Every throne feeds. He stepped forward. Then I will bury it. The queen rose. Bones cracked as her spine unfolded to its true length. Her body stretched unnaturally tall, tusks growing longer as veins like worms throbbed across her skin. From the pit behind her, the last beast emerged, a swine the size of a cathedral, with faces on its haunches, human arms growing from its ribs, and a mane made of golden hair, the same as Isolde's had once been. It howled, and the chamber shook. Cassian charged. The battle that followed would be remembered in dreams only. The sword Hallowfang met the flesh of forgotten royalty. Screams bounced from skull to skull. Light clashed against hunger. The queen struck with arms like whips, tearing at Cassian's armor. He answered with fire, driving his blade into her leg, into her belly, into her chest. Blood sprayed. It burned the ground. She laughed through it all. The final blow came not from strength, but from memory. As Cassian drove Hallowfang into her throat, the blade glowed with ancestral fire. And in that moment, Isolde remembered her name. Not the title, not the beast, but the girl who once played in gardens, who feared the dark, who looked at her mother with hope. And that girl screamed. The queen exploded into mist. The pit roared. The swine howled. And then, silence. Cassian stood alone in the throne chamber, blood dripping from his blade, the pit sealed, its mouth closed by stone and time. Around him, the bones crumbled to dust. The castle groaned. The darkness faded. Outside, the sun rose. The pigs had vanished. Eldhollow would remain empty for 1,000 years, a ruin that birds never flew over, a place that made compasses spin. But the curse had ended. Cassian never returned to court. He became a wanderer, a knight without name, forever hunted by whispers of swine and eyes in the trees. And yet, each spring, someone hears a grunt in the wind. Each spring, one sow is born with golden eyes. Because some stories are not killed. They are only buried. You've just witnessed one of the darkest punishments in history. But many more still lurk in the shadows. So if you dare, subscribe to Torture Vault, where every scream from the past still echoes.